Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the HCD Mindset podcast or vidcast. Today's a little bit different. We are going to be talking about all those things we love to talk about, of course, but today we're going to do a little bit of a flashback on an event we had in 2020 called NeuroU. Now, it is something that we've done for a while. We'll review that a little bit with you. But just to give you a heads up, that's what we're talking about today. As always, my name is Michelle Niedziela, and I'm joined, of course, with Kathryn.
Hi, everybody. Yep, Kathryn Ambroze here. As always, we're excited to chat a little bit about what we're going to be showing everyone today. Michelle, can you share a little bit about NeuroU? This was kind of your baby for a bit.
Yeah. So as most of you know, the interest at HCD has always been around education, right? So education and scientific validity, and within that comes communication. And so Bill is head of our technology. We were talking one day really about, we always have these conversations with clients about what all these different sort of measures and approaches are when you're using neuroscience and physiological measurements. And there's a lot of confusion around those measures. And, if you've been joining us on this journey with the vidcast, you've definitely heard us talk about that. But also there's some fear around these measures, or there's some expectations around these measures.
Maybe misinformation.
And so we thought, wouldn't it be great to just get everybody in one spot with some experts in the field, so it's not just us, because we didn't want it to seem salesy. We're very anti-salesy for a company that provides consulting services. We're actually really anti-salesy, but so we wanted to create this symposium where we could bring in academic experts, industry experts, and clients, and other people that just everybody is welcome, students, industry people, to come in and talk about and learn about all these different measures, new approaches, old approaches, how you integrate things. And so we created this sort of safe space for learning in industry. And it's been really successful. So we've been doing it for about 3 years now. We started off, just going over some of the basics, and then, we've brought in new technologies and, going beyond even just neuroscience. So also including implicit and psychological stuff and AI and smart speakers, and trying to get everybody caught up on what's going on in the industry and make sure that we're all on equal footing on learning what it's about. Because whether it's a company that's, selling a technique, or if it's a client that is looking to, pay to have research done using a technique, everybody needs to really have a good understanding of what those techniques are, just so we're all in a good understanding, in a good space to be able to use things, and you're not being sold something that, isn't doing what they say it's doing. There's no, snake oil or charlatans going around. So that's really what NeuroU was about when Bill and I first talked about it. We are very lucky being at HCD to have Glenn Kessler as our fearless leader, because he's open to these ideas, right? And I think, we did it of the first year, and then the second year, Kathryn, you were able to join us. We kind of threw you right into the fire and said, hey, go ahead, go forth and present something. And, it was fun, right?
It was so much fun. And it's a really unique opportunity to have so many different perspectives in the same room, contributing to the same conversation, and really getting an understanding. And like you said, that equal footing of, considerations that you might not have because it's not in your wheelhouse most of the time. So having those conversations and very interdisciplinary conversations helps to give a little bit more of a well-rounded approach. But one of my personal favorites is that we went virtual this year, which was really exciting for the first time. And I miss
as one does during a pandemic,
Yeah. And the thing is, I miss seeing everybody in the office. So one of my favorite parts was that we had a panel that brought together a lot of our members of HCD to talk about topics that Michelle had mentioned. But we were trying to include topics like challenges when you're piecing together different streams of data, and then also just how to translate that data into something meaningful, as well as thinking of things that are happening in our current environment. Back in 2020, the main focus was COVID and what's, going on in the world. So all of those things influence how people do market research. And that topic is always going to be important. So we wanted to share it with you today. And all of these topics are addressed in the upcoming recording we're going to be sharing. I just want to do a small introduction of who was on that conversation. It was Michelle and I, who we've introduced ourselves now. You are hopefully familiar. And along with us, we were joined in this open discussion with Bill Thaw, who is our Director of Technology, one of our lovely market research managers, Carolyn Sturm, the Director of Global Research, Allison Gutkowski, and of course, our fearless leader, the President and CEO of HCD, Glenn Kessler.
And it really was a lot of fun, like you said, really getting to get all of us together and have these conversations that normally we would have in the office,
Right.
But also being able to bring in the attendees, the audience, which is something we normally have in person when we do NeuroU. But in this case, really getting members of the virtual viewing community to participate and be part of these conversations that we were having. So, including some of their questions that they were sending in. Some people actually joined and turned on their cameras, turned off their mute so that they could join us. So we definitely had a lot of fun bringing everybody into the discussion, which is something we always hope to do, right? We want to get people to engage with us, definitely in person at NeuroU, but it was, it's even more challenging when you have a virtual situation, but, to facilitate these sort of discussions and have it really hit home with people. So I think, a lot of what we were trying to accomplish was, spark this interest in really understanding the key points about using this type of research and the critical thinking of being able to understand the ins and outs and the misinformation that's out there. So we are, now in 2021,
Yes.
and we are still virtual.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good hope on the horizon, and, hopefully we'll all be able to meet together again in the future. But, as far as, NeuroU this year, I think we're probably going to have, at the very least, a virtual component, if not totally virtual. And so if you or anybody else is interested in NeuroU, please feel free to reach out to us anytime, via commenting, right? Or emailing us or tweeting with us or finding us on LinkedIn, all the typical things. Easiest thing to do, obviously, is hit the subscribe button and to comment below. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. We thought it was so valuable that we thought we'd bring it out again. So without further ado, let's check it out.
Roll the clip.
We're going to bring on the HCD team to start talking about questions that you've submitted on everything that we've sort of gone over so far, but also kind of to review some of the, I think, really key points that were very common and a common thread through everything. Glenn, you can come on as well. It's okay.
One of the couple times Michelle says yes.
I think most of you know, of course, myself. You've seen Allison talk, and you've just heard from Kathryn, and you've heard from Glenn. Carolyn, if you could introduce yourself so we can get an idea of who you are.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Carolyn Sturm. I'm a market research manager here at HCD. I graduated from the College of New Jersey in 2018, and I've been on board with HCD team since then. I actually interned with them for the spring semester of my senior year, and since then I've been working on the analysis side of things. So I'm a member of the analytics team. So I'm working on a day-to-day with clients to develop surveys, analyze the results, and kind of just deliver the results to the clients and communicate with them to make sure that they do get value out of the research that they do here with us at HCD.
I love having you on there for that reason, because you really do a lot of the actual work when it comes to the stuff that we're talking about. So I think that's important to bring up here. And we also are rejoined by Bill Thaw. So I don't know if you really need to introduce yourself. You spoke recently, but feel free to give a brief intro.
Sure. I'll just mention, I'm the technology manager at HCD, so I'm in charge of the equipment and the signal processing and a lot of the in-field logistics, testing, collecting, all that stuff. So that's me.
Awesome. Now I do think, thinking about all the things that we've kind of been over, a lot has been covered. Some really interesting topics. There were some really great conversations around technology, right? And so, we're happy to address some of those questions. But as far as, bringing sort of Carolyn into this conversation, so much of it has to do with statistics, right? Because you get this data and it's really cool, and people think it's great to like slap some gear on someone. Maybe it's an EEG headset or whatever it is, and that's all fine and good. But the nitty gritty of it is that you get a bunch of numbers that don't mean anything, right? Until you sort through them. So what do you think are the biggest challenges of all these sources of information? Because you deal with both the sort of physiological measures, the data that comes in there, but also the traditional measures. So the qual, the quant. What do you see as the biggest challenges on bringing these two sides together? Because it's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's a question, a lot of clients also have when first doing neuro with us as well. So I think obviously it's really important to stress the idea that, coming together, you are trying to tell a story with the results. So of course, a lot of times when you do research, we might see, in traditional measures and liking and preference of ads or commercials that consumers may feel one way, whereas the biometrics tells a different story. So maybe in, the biometrics, an ad that was preferred didn't perform as well biometrically. Tease that apart and get those specific reasons as to maybe why. So I think the challenge there is trying to get the clients on board sometimes to kind of get the value in those specific findings and understanding, okay, well, in previous research, we may have had this idea for this ad commercial being the winner, but when doing biometrics, we actually uncovered that there are strengths, but there's also some weaknesses that they didn't know previously. And that's what biometrics helps to uncover for sure.
That's
yeah,
really cool.
and just
go ahead, Elsa.
Yeah, let me just add to that because my role is kind of that first line of introduction. Oftentimes, the first time in. So while more on the sales side of onboarding the clients, it's really trying to set the expectations. And the questions that we actually get are, what happens if the neuroscientific or the implicit results are not matching the self-report? And it's not that one is correct and one is incorrect. It's truly that we're looking at two different types of brain processes and we're measuring two different things. And it's really important to understand why those things are telling us different. It's almost more magical when they are saying different things because that's really when these deep insights come out. And it's really important to understand kind of, okay, they're not telling the same thing, but why? And that's really where the value is uncovered. And I think the hardest thing, especially, is trying to set the expectation of what type of insights we are going to achieve and what kind of data that we are going to receive. As we've talked about a lot throughout NeuroU, there's a lot of misinformation about, this is one of the most exaggerated ones, but, being able to read a consumer's mind. And we really have to be cautious and clear in setting the expectations, yes, of what we're actually going to get. And I think the magic between, Carolyn and her team in analytics and someone like myself is I'm not an analyst, I'm a layman. And I like to kind of tag on to some of the report.
We need you to challenge us though, right? When something doesn't make sense or like how does that fit the story? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really a beautiful kind of mix between this really, complex types of science that we're doing, but also being able to tell the story with it and it and within that one side, how are you going to pass this on 10 people down the road to share with upper management?
Something that you said that I think really is something to kind of nail in on a little bit more is what you should expect from these sort of measures. And we don't want it to just repeat something you could have just asked, right? Because if you could have just asked the question, for example, like liking, then you should just ask it. It's certainly cheaper to put it in a scale question and easier to deal with the data, right, Carolyn? Than, putting an EEG headset on or looking at skin temperature or anything like that. So I think that is a really key point right there. Now, one thing I would kind of throw over to Bill and Kathryn to talk about a little bit is, so something we've talked about in this conference has been about, wearables, and also we talked about, smart speakers. And, since a lot of the terminology now has to do with behavior and habits, it does seem that these technologies are kind of supposed to put people more in their sort of natural environment and natural behaviors. what are some of the challenges, or maybe what are sort of the next steps, other ways that people can approach getting at these, like, you know, real experiences as opposed to the lab-based?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues with wearables, as we discussed a few days ago, is in a lot of ways it can give you basically like a bag of sand worth of data. You know, what you need is somewhere in there, but it's not exactly designed for some of the purposes we're using it for. And as such, you have to really do a lot of digging. And that's really the biggest caveat I give with wearables. But there's the flexibility is unparalleled. I mean, somebody being able to walk around and go about their house, go about their day, you can't do that with that lab equipment. You know, it's just not going to happen. So it's really, I mean, it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but it's a careful balance, you know, of a good application for something that's a wearable, so that you could basically design it so no matter what happens, you're getting the output you're looking for, versus and this is incredibly common and I don't like to see it, hey, let's slap some gear on somebody and see what we get. That's always, to me, it's like a dagger in the heart. It's like, oh boy, here we go, strap in. You know, we're going to get all this stuff, and we're not going to plan what we're going to get first, but we're being asked to just take whatever we get and make a story from what could be nothing. And that's one of the dicey things with wearables and in-person and like in-home type of stuff in general, is you got to really be careful with freeform, because you can end up with a data set and days, weeks, months worth of sorting and algorithmic permutations to make it make any sense at all. So that's kind of, you know, not to be too negative, but like that's kind of how I feel.
Kathryn, it looks like you want to add something to that.
Yeah, so I agree with Bill 100%, but the other thing that we always have to keep in mind when we're looking at naturalistic settings is that if there is a lot going on in your environment, it's hard to decipher what is exactly causing that reaction to whatever you see in the data. So even if you have that giant thing of sand and you do see some activity going on in it, it doesn't necessarily mean what you are hoping is being, you know, what you're hoping to see is causing that reaction. So by having that controlled environment, it does help to kind of decipher what is causing whatever, because there is so much going on in any given situation. And I think our slogan, our unofficial slogan, I don't know if it's official, but the right tools for the right question is really a foundational way to approach good research.
Yeah. A lot of times we do need to add that behavioral coding component, so that we can take that bag of sand and give it a little bit of shape, right?
Yes.
So that
Make
we
the
don't,
sand castle.
Yeah, divide the sand a little bit, so that Carolyn isn't, to completely overwhelmed with random data that she can't make heads or tails of. Now, Allison and Glenn, I'd like to throw to both of you. Where do you see some of the newest sort of questions that you would, kind of take a look on the sales side and say, the direction that clients seem to be going is in this way? What do you see as the direction?
Glenn, do you want to go first?
Sure. Partly, and it's sort of a salient issue, the environment right now is causing people to rethink possibly wearables and at-home research. It may be temporary. The question is this something that's going to last beyond this particular time where there's fear of going to central locations and so on? And so I think that's an area that people are going to explore, and possibly it could be cemented in the way we do research.
And I think, and this has kind of been the trend maybe for the last 3 years or so, but certainly it's even changed, but more mandate and company-wide recommendations to start looking at, most of the time it's deemed system one types of approaches to understanding the consumers. Now, I think this really kind of turned maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but a lot of those questions that we were getting were or research questions that we were getting and then asked to do neuro on that weren't appropriate, weren't the right tool for neuroscientific or psychological, like implicit types of methods. Now I can see that people are much more educated. They're still getting that mandate, but they're better able to understand what types of methods are going to be appropriate, or really relying on their suppliers and vetting out their suppliers. And I think that's really, really important. And what I know we always try to preach is the number one thing when you're doing, at least from my perspective as one that tries to educate folks about what we're planning on doing before we do it, is educate yourself, vet your suppliers and who you're going to be working with, because this can be misused and you can get results truly maybe don't mean what we think they mean, or what
I want to piggyback on that a little bit, because I do think that again, that is really important, and something I've said from the beginning when I started joining in, with HCD, and when I first went to my first neuromarketing meeting, is that I felt that a lot of these suppliers out there that were supplying neuromarketing or system one type of research, I feel like they were underestimating their client. They were banking on their client not understanding things and not realizing, I had come from the client side. I had a PhD in neuroscience, and I was working, at J&J and then Mars Chocolate. And they were just making the assumption that people wouldn't know better. And so I think they can't get away with that anymore. I think people are starting to ask some really good questions. Bill, I know you spend a lot of time fielding questions from clients that are very specific about the technologies.
Actually, that's one of the things I would jump in with as well. For me, it's always been, I'm always skeptical, and people always should be skeptical of any vendor who only uses one technology. Are you tasting a chocolate bar? EEG. Are you watching a TV show? EEG, or whatever. There has to be some type of variance, because we all know not everything is good for every solution. It's not just one tool for the job, to call that again. It's appropriateness is still a problem. And early on, maybe 8-10 years ago, there was a little bit of a knowledge disconnect between clients, and some of the companies could get away with that. Now it's foolish to think that someone's going to believe that.
Yeah.
And I think a subset is related to the classic black box. We've talked about that before, but if somebody has a magical black box that has algorithms or AI, which are terms that are constantly used, that aren't vetted through academic studies, and they don't disclose the components of the black box, it's probably a good idea to reconsider.
Yeah, and some of that is going to be, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Some of that is going to be proprietary. Proprietary algorithms and stuff like that is obviously going to be protected IP. But the basis of some of it, you kind of is pretty normal. Hey, we do this type of filtering, we do this type of this. You don't have to tell us the exact, coefficients and exact, formula to your algorithm, but it can't just be
we should understand where it came from.
This is our engagement metric. It's like, well, what does that even mean? You have 7 different inputs, and the output is engagement. That's pretty suspect.
Yeah, I would complement that with, you don't have to show, it's like proprietary information is proprietary, but they could always show you literature that is published that could be, available to anybody. So to show them, why is this a validated tool? What about this is validated? And to give them the papers and really cite your sources, then that at least gives you that,
there has to be a reason for that measure. Totally. Yep. Now to switch gears a little bit, and I think anybody can answer in this one, maybe Kathryn the most, because you are on location. So there's a lot going on in the world right now. People joke that 2020 is basically a dumpster fire. So with that, with all the things going on right now, it's certainly affecting people. So it's certainly affecting the timing of how research is being conducted. Some things have been pushed back, we know for sure, but we've had some research that has either been specifically around, lockdown related questions, or maybe values driven questions with all the politics going on right now. So really interesting stuff has been driven by all the chaos going on around us. So I think there's kind of a question in there about how research is going, but also how that's maybe affecting participants, right? And Carolyn, I know that we've had some of these conversations with some current research we're doing, which is, do we think that it changes the way people answer when the world is in chaos around them, that there is a lot of stress going on? Anybody's welcome to jump in here.
So from the side of the technician, things have become, I would say they continue to be a little bit more clinical, where you are working towards making sure that they're comfortable, but in a really, really safe environment by taking those extra precautions that, you know, by having gloves available for them if they didn't bring them and it was something that was asked of them, or having masks available if that was something that they maybe left in their car. Having these things in place just to offer the certain types of PPE, or even just seeing that hand sanitizer, not necessarily, you know, if they use it, like you ask them to use it, but I think also visual cues of it help to bring people to feel like they're in a safe place and that we are taking those extra steps to really make this research make the experience of the pandemic not going to affect the research as much as we possibly can.
And Allison, you've seen questions specifically around issues going on now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add what Kathryn said, and it's not just who's conducting the research, but where. From the moment that person is recruited to the central location, they have to feel safe. And I think choosing a partner and the central location, if you are in central location, that is going to help build on all of those cues, that they have markers on the ground. There's a specific protocol. If there's an elevator there, how many people are allowed and what does that look like is really, really important. And being transparent with the respondents of what type of measures are being taken to ensure their safety.
Also, I think that the environment causes people to look at things differently. We have some empirical evidence from, for some years, we tested the Super Bowl for a network and Super Bowl advertising. And we had a hypothesis that in 2009, the metric that we were using, which was mostly focused on the winning ads, had been humorous ads. We hypothesized that the metric would be a lower score when people were fearful of going to work the next day and losing their jobs in 2009 versus February 2008, where that wasn't an environmental factor. And I think that it suggests that when we measure people's perceptions during times like this, should be open to the possibility that their feelings about products are different right now than they were before and maybe in the future.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And Allison, maybe you can speak to a little bit about the changing research questions that we've been getting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely clients' priorities are changing, right? They have to be on their toes and pivoting to keep up with the current environment. And it's certainly reflected within the research questions that we are dealing with at the moment. So it is around a little bit more of what is the current mindset. And it becomes really interesting when we're thinking about, you know,
how people are using products differently, right?
How people are using products, you know, research around your financial mindset. And if you're using, you know, a specific bank or someone like a financial advisor, what's most important to you? That's changed. That's very different. Given, you know, where people are getting stimulus checks in the mail, the unemployment rate, the general population's mindset is very, very different. And it's for us to understand that, especially even if we're using maybe things such as validated psychological scales, for example, you know, quality of life. You know, if we've used those in the past and we've seen, you know, typically what does a result look like, we have to have the expectation that we're in a different state and potentially those validated scales, it might be down, right? And we have to understand why. And I think addressing that and really taking a second to think about how is this current environment affecting your research questions is important in understanding what type of results you're going to get out of it as well.
Right, and just to kind of add on to that too, I know with developing, you know, surveys and things like that, during the pandemic, it's kind of, you know, with Allison, to your point, taking a step back and thinking, okay, are we asking a loaded question, you know, with the implicit association tests and things like that, sometimes words will include words such as safe and things like that. So kind of just taking a step back during the pandemic and just making sure that, you know, we're being cognizant of the impact that it's had on respondents and that we're not asking, loaded question in that regard. And, we certainly have had clients and projects that have had been, adjusted because of the pandemic. We've actually kind of incorporated questions, asking respondents how they've been affected, which is kind of, really interesting as well. So we've gotten even, more additional insights that we weren't going to originally get, before the pandemic when the research was originally planned. So definitely some additional insights that we're getting as well. And we're actually able to kind of incorporate the effect the pandemic has had in respondents and gotten really good, valuable information in regards to that as well.
I just wanted to add one thing, and that is, if this lasts another year or two, it's a good idea to revisit the positioning of a product as well as the features and the attributes of the product that you promote, because they may not be relevant as people's lives have changed.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, I've always looked at, hey, what's happening with all of our historical data sets? Mm-hmm. Anyone who has the past 20 years of sales volume and what have you, well, we're in a completely different environment. A short while ago, none of us were really going to grocery stores and buying things like that. And if you happen to, if you're, Purell or 3M, everything is totally different. A few months ago, I could say PPE and nobody knows what I'm talking about. Now it's generally accepted. And that's kind of an interesting norms. I see too, is now people have less faith in their historical information because it doesn't really predict as well.
In the last half hour, something happened to me that would never happen before. My wife called me as I was watching this, and I picked it up, and she says, "I'm at Costco. I scored some sanitizing wipes." Never before has my wife called me with the excitement that she had over sanitizing wipes.
I saw a meme that was kind of a joke around that, while we used to be excited about, whatever things was going on in the world, now we're excited when our grocery order doesn't have any substitutions. In any case, thank you so much, HCD panel, for joining in this conversation. I think we talked about some really important topics here. And I really appreciate all your input in this.